G'day legends, I hope you're all fantastic. On today's video, I want to take the time to answer some frequently asked questions about the new Fractal AM4. I just want to start by saying a massive thank you to everybody who took the time to watch the first video that I did with the AM4. I massively appreciate it. If you want to support what I'm doing here on the channel, you can check out some of the music that I make with my band Ragdoll. You can sign up to the Patreon. You can grab my blocks libraries from the Gumroad store, or you can simply like the video and tell your mates about it. Let's dive into some questions now. Let's talk about the 4 effect slots on the AM4 to get started. I think this is the biggest misconception or misunderstanding with this product. Yes, each preset gives you 4 freely assignable effect slots on here, but each effects block has 4 channels on there. So a really good example is this AM4 Gig Rig, the first factory preset. It's set up with 4 different scenes, which uses different channels in every single block. So you go from a clean style twin to a pushed Vox AC30 on here. You have a jumped Plexi, and then you've got a Boogie 2C+. You will notice when I play through all of these that they are going to have different delay and reverb settings, along with different amp and cab settings in there and different drive selections over there. So this is like having 4 totally different rigs in a single preset. On top of all of that, there's so many more functions in here. Every single preset has a built-in noise gate on the input. So that's like having a free gate block on every single preset. If we navigate over to the amp block here, you can see there is a built-in output boost function on this page. When you're in the effects mode and you tap the amp button over here, this will engage or disengage the output boost. Furthermore, if we are back in the amp block and we hit the 2 page buttons together, you'll enter amp expert mode over here. So you can come over to, say, the preamp over here, and you can use things like the cut switch, the fat switch, and assign a built-in input boost. For example, let's select an input boost that's, say, a Super OD. So this is like having a Boss Super Overdrive pedal with the gain all the way down and the level all the way up on there. So you've got an input boost and an output boost just in the amp block alone. Furthermore, the amp block has a built-in input EQ. It has an output EQ. Every single preset in here as well has an output EQ that you can turn on and off per preset as well, which is very, very handy. Furthermore, the cab block has a mic preamp, a room reverb. You can run stereo cabs. You could set up the delay to do just delay. You could set up diffusion in there for a reverb style sound. You could set up modulation on there for chorus and flanger sounds. The reverb block has a pre-delay setting that you can use as a dedicated echo. So basically the reverb is a delay and a reverb together as well. You've also got pitch shifting in the reverb block on there. And of course, you've got things like modifiers, you've got external controllers, you can hook up expression pedals to control any parameter that you like in here, which I really, really like. Oh yeah, the amp block also has a built-in bias tremolo as well. And if you're in there in expert mode, you can tweak the amp to your heart's content and do a bunch of virtual mods. Like if you want to do a virtual Jose mod and move the master volume location on there, add an input boost, change the depth, frequency, and the amount of negative feedback, you can do that and save it into a preset or save it in the editor into the blocks library. It is mega, mega flexible. Furthermore, we could have different presets with different layouts on there. Gapless switching between presets also gives you a lot of flexibility. What I've done with this bank of presets is I've copied the same amp settings into 4 different presets, and I've surrounded it with different effects blocks. So in my first preset, I have a wah before the amp, then a dimension chorus and a delay block after the amp. On my second version of the preset, I've swapped out the wah for a phaser. And again, I've got 4 channels in there. I think I've set up a phase 90 and a couple of different univibe variations on that preset. My third preset moves the amp block to the front of the chain. I've got the enhancer, a delay, and a reverb in here. And then my fourth preset, again, moves the amp block further back in the chain, but I've got an octave fuzz into an envelope filter, and I've got the surround delay on there. So with this setup, if I like those amp tones on there and I just wanted to bring in different effects, I can use this. also heard that I had spillover turned on. So I had a massive surround delay sound on my fourth preset over there. When I switch back over to this first preset where I had the delay block off, I still got the delay tails on there. Gig mode. Now, this is the default foot switch setting on the AM4 when you unbox it. If we were to go into the setup and navigate over to the second setup page for the foot switches, you can see I've currently got press and hold mode set as gig mode. Now, personally for me, I like having a custom setup over here where you can program the hold function for any function that you like on there. But I think gig mode is super flexible because if we're on the preset layout over here, or any other layout for that matter, if I press these two buttons together, this will take me to the mode selector. So if I've chosen my preset and I want to access the scenes, I can then do that. So I'm on my first preset over here and I've got my scenes set up. What you can see with the way I've laid this preset out is each effect block in here is saved to a different scene with a different channel. Well, all of them except the wah, because I just used the one wah sound. So in this single preset, I've got 4 different amp sounds, 4 different chorus sounds, and 4 different delay sounds on there. And that is one way that this is so much more than just 4 static effects blocks. So I could go through a couple of different amp models on here. If I wanted to change the mode, again, I press these 2 foot switches and this takes me back to the mode selector. If I was on that same scene and I wanted to play around with the effects on here, I would hit my effects layout. This way on, say, this 4th scene where I'm using the Mark series amp, I could toggle my chorus and my delay on and off. I've got an expression pedal hooked up to this preset so that I can auto-engage the wah on any of these scenes as well. In gig mode, and the effects mode over here, if you press and hold any of these foot switches, it will bring up the channel picker. So let's say I take the delay and I press it and hold it. Now I can select between my 4 different delays that I've got in here. Let's have a listen to the surround delay and then the different settings that I've dialed in on the various dual delay blocks. I can do the same thing with any of these effect blocks on here. So I could select a different chorus mode, like the dimension chorus over here. Furthermore, in the amp block over here, again, I've got my 4 different channels, so I could set this up to select any of the amps that I like. But across all of these modes, if I press and hold these 2 foot switches, I enter what's called amp mode over here, where the authentic controls for the amp block are displayed. And then I can toggle through the different channels over here, and it will leave the controls up over here. This is really, really handy. Say I wanted to dial in my FAS Stealth Blue with slightly more gain, I can do that. Then I can come over to my Brit 800 2203 high, turn the gain down for a little more crunch. I could come over to the Euro Blue and let's say I wanted to adjust the depth control over there. I can also go down here and get the EQ controls. On my 4th channel, what I have, the Mark IV lead over here. Again, let's say I just wanted to back the overdrive off a little bit. I could come down here and say, dial in a little bit more bass. And I know you may think I'm insane for leaving the bass on 0 on an amp model, but that's how Mark series amps work. So the amp mode, I think, is really, really awesome on here. Again, being able to not only select your different amps, but have the effect controls up there so that you can instantly dial them in. Another way that this is really nice and flexible, and I think a big workflow improvement over other Fractal units. Finally, if I press the third and fourth button together, I get into the tuner and tap tempo mode over here. So I can set up the tap tempo for my preset and I can tune my guitar. If I hit the third button, it will mute the tuner as well. Now, personally, if I was using this at the heart of a rig, I would probably use an external MIDI controller or an external pedal to have the tap tempo always accessible. That's just something that I need when I'm gigging. But again, being able to be anywhere on this and hit these two buttons to get into that mode is very handy indeed. Regarding the effect selection on the AM4, it is not quite as vast as the other Fractal products out there, but you still have all the amazing delay and reverb effects in there, the rotary block, the tremolo, a volume block, a wah block, the chorus block, the compressor block, all the Fractal drives, all the filter effects. There's the flanger, the noise gate, a graphic EQ, a parametric EQ, and a phaser. Furthermore, as I've mentioned several times, all of these have 4 channels on there. So if you wanted to have a Plexi, a Twin, a 5150, and a Mark Series amp on the 4 channels of the amp block, if you wanted to have a slapback delay, a long stereo delay, a memory man, and a 2290 in the delay block, you can do all of that. And similarly, the reverb might have something like a plate, a hall, one of the cloud reverbs, and then a pitched reverb in there. So you can get a lot of flexibility out of those effects modes on there. And of course, it pairs up well with other Fractal products like the VP4. I've got a video showing how I would use the VP4 and the AM4 together, including the scene sync mode. A very popular question is how the AM4 compares to the FM3. They are very different devices. The FM3 is powered by mains and has its own internal power supply, whereas the AM4 uses a wall wart style power supply on here. The AM4 also has fewer outputs. It does have balanced outputs, but they are not XLR outputs on here. Furthermore, you have 4 effect slots per preset in here. And this kind of ties into the other question of only 4 blocks. Well, again, you can have 4 channels on every single block in here, and you can arrange them into 4 scenes. The FM3 gives you 8 scenes per preset, and it also gives you a fully customizable foot switching layout on here. The AM4, as we have seen, has gig mode as a default, or you can customize the press and hold functions on here, but these aren't freely assignable like they are on the FM3. The FM3 will also integrate with the Fractal FC controllers as well. Furthermore, the AM4 actually has SPDIF in and out, whereas the FM3 only has SPDIF out on there. The FM3 has a second set of outputs that you can place anywhere in there. The way I think about the AM4 is this is like a pedal board amp replacement with some awesome effects built in, whereas the FM3 is a complete rig replacement. It's like a mothership, whereas this is really designed to be used with other elements in your rig if you need them. Another question a lot of you have been asking about is whether you can run the AM4 direct to front of house with a cab sim enabled, while simultaneously running to a backline amp and cab without a cab sim. You can. It's called split mode. We just go to the setup menu over here and we can select between stereo, some left and right, copy left to right, and the new split mode. So the left output will have the cab sim enabled and the right output will have no cab sim. So you could take that to the effects return of a backline amp or to a dedicated power amp and guitar cabinet. The AM4 has MIDI inputs and outputs, as well as 2 pedal jacks on here for external control. So if you go to the setup menu and page across to MIDI and remote, you can set the MIDI channel, whether you want to receive or send MIDI PCs over here. Then you can set custom CCs for just about any function in here, whether it's bypassing effects, whether it's changing channels, whether it is setting up the scene sync function, which I cover on a video I did with the AM4 and the VP4. And then look at all of these different ways you can control the AM4. You can activate the metronome, the tuner, the effects block bypasses and channels, and have external controls on here as well. So you have the ability to just use these 4 built-in foot switches if you want, but you could build this into the heart of a very extensive MIDI switching rig. Like imagine this hooked up to something like an RJM controller where you've got like 16 or 24 foot switches to control everything. Can you get tap tempo on the AM4? You can. I'm currently in what's called gig mode. So if I press these 2 buttons together, this will bring up the tuner and the tap tempo menu over here. On the left, I can tap in the tempo of my given preset. Of course, there's 2 pedal jacks and there's MIDI on here. So if you wanted to connect a cheap external tap tempo foot switch, say into pedal jack number 2, you can easily set that up to do tap tempo. To do that, we would go into the setup menu, we'd navigate to the MIDI and remote menu down here. And when I come down to control, where it says tap tempo, I could assign this to pedal 2. You can see that I've currently got this assigned to a MIDI CC if I wanted to use this with a MIDI controller. Something to clarify is while the AM4 has 4 channels in every block, including the amp block, you're just going to be running a single instance of the amp block. So essentially it's a mono amp. However, if you want to get into the cab block and customize it, you can blend 2 different Dynacab or user cabs in here. So what I like doing sometimes is running, say, the same Dynacab with 2 different mics and panning them hard left and hard right, and that will give you a lovely wide stereo image. However, just keep in mind if you wanted to use stereo effects before the AM4, they are going to be summed down to mono. The effects loop on the AM4 is a hardware insert loop here. So it's not freely assignable. It is placed at the end of the chain. And the thinking with that is, let's say you had a reverb pedal or a delay pedal that has unbalanced outputs. You would place it in the insert loop on here. It would be placed at the end of the chain, but you can still use the balanced outputs on the AM4. So you don't need a separate DI box. Again, the AM4 is really designed to be used with other pedals on here. So you could place, say, an analog wah and drive before the AM4. You could use whatever blocks you want in here. You could place something like a delay pedal or a reverb pedal in the insert loop at the end of the chain and still come out of the stereo outs balanced to front of house. Well, the AM4 chassis is essentially the same as the VP4. The internals are different in there, and this has a faster processor so that it can run the amp block in here. So it's not just a case of Fractal taking the VP4, adding an amp block via a firmware update, and then rebadging it as the AM4. This is actually a different piece of hardware. A lot of people have been asking about preset compatibility between, say, the FM3 and the AM4. The presets aren't directly compatible, but if you came into the amp block and you dialed in the amp and cab exactly the same on the AM4 and any of the other Fractal units with amp modeling, you're going to get the same tones on there. And you also have access to expert edit on the unit and in the editor over here. If you hit the page buttons together over here, you can see it's gone into amp expert mode where you have the headroom meter, and you can page across here and get all the controls that you would expect from a Fractal unit. Like, say you wanted to change the preamp tube type and experiment there, or move over here and play around with the master volume location and virtually mod your amp. You have that ability on there. By default, it is off. Again, it's designed to be a plug and play, straightforward amp replacement. You've also got an extensive set of modifiers and controllers available. For example, in this preset, I have an LFO attached to the motor speed of the tape delay in here. I could set it up to be an ADSR, a sequencer, an envelope follower, or a pitch follower, or I could assign it to an external controller or pedal jack on here. This essentially is going to be changing the delay time, and in doing so, changing the pitch of the echoes on here. So this is great if you want glitchy style delays. My favorite has to be the pitch follower though. What I've done is I've attached this modifier to the amp input gain and the delay and reverb input gain as well. So you can see over here, as I play higher, the delay and reverb is going to get more wet, and I'm going to have more gain and saturation. I hope this video helped answer some questions about the functionality of the AM4. If you've got any more, just drop them in the comment section below. What I will do is just recap and consolidate what I was talking about with the foot switching mode, effects, and channels over here. So we'll just go through an example. I'm currently on this LT Grease preset number 2. I've got it set up with a phaser, an amp, and a chorus at the moment. If I wanted to swap over to having, say, this preset where I've got the amp, the enhancer, the delay, and a reverb, I can just switch between those two really easily. Now, if I'm in this preset and I want to go to the scenes or the effects mode, in gig mode, I would hit these two buttons. I can select my scenes. Let's say I navigate over to scene 3, which is using the Euro Blue amp model. There's a delay and a reverb on there. Again, I've kind of got this set up for like a Lukather style tone. Once I'm in there, I can hit these two buttons over here and go to the effects layout. And then I can repeat that process if I want to change to another scene or another preset. These two together, I can select my mode over here, or I can go over to the tuner and tap tempo, mute it and tune my guitar, change the tempo of anything that I've got time synced over there. Again, thanks so much for watching the video. Let me know if you've got any more specific questions about the AM4, other Fractal products, or any other videos that you'd like to see up here on the channel. Again, if you want to check out the music, the Patreon, or the blocks libraries, they are all linked in the video description, along with my free cab IR that I used in a lot of the tones on this video. Now go grab your guitars and make some music, because that is the point of all of this at the end of the day. Take it easy.